Jerusalem smelled of lamb's blood and burning cedar that morning. The Passover was just days away, and the city had swollen past its walls. Pilgrims sleeping on rooftops, in alleyways, pressed into every corner of the ancient city like grain filling a jar to the brim. Roman soldiers moved through the crowds in their bronze and leather, watching, always watching. The whole city hummed with a restless, uncertain energy, the way the air feels before a storm that hasn't decided yet whether it will come. His name was Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter's son from the north, a man who had walked the dusty roads of Galilee healing the blind and feeding the hungry, who had touched lepers no one else would touch, and spoken to women no one else would speak to. His hands were calloused from years of work with wood. He knew what it felt like to drive a nail. His friends were fishermen and tax collectors. He wept at tombs. He laughed at wedding feasts. He was, by every visible measure, just a man. And yet, everywhere he went, something happened. Something no one quite had words for. And now, after 3 years of that something, the city of Jerusalem held him in its grip, and the powerful men who ran the world were very, very afraid of him. The question hanging over everything that Friday morning was not whether Jesus would suffer. He already was. The question was whether this was the end, or whether the end could somehow mean something else entirely. They had arrested him in a garden the night before, while the olive trees stood still and the disciples scattered like frightened sparrows into the dark. His name had been sold for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. He had been dragged before the high priest, then before Pilate, the Roman governor who ran the province with the cold efficiency of a man who had long since stopped caring about justice and cared only about order. Pilate had found no fault in him. He said so, out loud, in public, more than once. His wife had sent him a note that morning, her hands trembling. Asterisk have nothing to do with that righteous man. I suffered much in a dream because of him. Asterisk Pilate had washed his hands in a basin of water in front of the crowd, as if water could wash a thing like that away. It cannot. It never can. They flogged Jesus with a Roman flagellum, a whip threaded with bone and metal, until the skin of his back was in ribbons. They pressed a crown of thorns onto his head, the thorns thick as a man's finger, and they mocked him in a purple robe, calling him King of the Jews with voices full of cruelty and laughter. Then they handed him a wooden crossbeam and sent him out through the city gates. He fell under the weight of it. The road to Golgotha, the place of the skull, was not long, but it was uphill, and he had not slept, and his body was failing. A man named Simon of Cyrene was pulled from the crowd and made to carry the beam the rest of the way. He had come to Jerusalem for the Passover. He had not come for this. No one had come for this. They nailed him to the cross at 9 in the morning. The sound of iron on iron rang out over the hill. They lifted the cross upright, and the city spread out below him, the temple gleaming white and gold in the morning sun, the rooftops, the crowds, all the ordinary noise and life of the world going on exactly as it always did. And above his head, Pilate had ordered a sign nailed in 3 languages, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, so that every person who passed could read it. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. The chief priests hated it. They asked Pilate to change it. He refused. Those 3 words, in those 3 languages, were perhaps the truest thing written in that whole city that day. 2 criminals were crucified beside him, one on the left, one on the right. The soldiers divided his clothing among themselves and cast lots for his robe, not knowing they were fulfilling a song written 1,000 years before. People passed and shook their heads and threw his own words back at him. He saved others. Let him save himself. The darkness was not only in the sky. And then, at noon, the sky went dark. Not the ordinary dark of a storm rolling in. This was a deep, strange darkness that settled over the land like a held breath. It lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of midday dark, while the city went quiet and the birds stopped singing and even the Roman soldiers fell still. Something was happening that no one had a category for. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a voice that cut through that silence like a stone through water, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It is the first line of the 22nd Psalm, a song of anguish and surrender that every Jewish child knew. He was praying with his last breath. He was crying out into the dark, into the silence, into what felt like absolute abandonment. and he was doing it with scripture on his lips and his arms stretched wide. He said, "I am thirsty." A soldier lifted a sponge soaked in sour wine on a stalk of hyssop, the same plant used at the very first Passover to brush lamb's blood onto doorposts in Egypt. The details are almost too precise to be accidental. And then he said, "It is finished." In Greek, one word, tetelestai, a word used in that era to mark a debt paid in full, a word stamped on receipts. Whatever had been owed, whatever the full weight of human failing and sorrow and sin amounted to, he spoke over it like a seal pressed into wax. He bowed his head, and he breathed his last. At that exact moment, the curtain in the temple, a curtain 60 feet tall and 4 inches thick, the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the very dwelling place of God, from everyone else, tore from top to bottom. Not from bottom to top, the way a person tears something. From top to bottom. The earth shook. Rocks split. Tombs outside the city opened. The Roman centurion standing at the foot of the cross, a hardened soldier, a man who had seen everything war could show a person, looked up at what had just happened and said quietly, "Surely this man was the Son of God." His mother was there. Her name was Mary, and she had stood at the foot of that cross and watched her son die. No theology prepared her for it. No prophecy made it easy. She stood there with the beloved disciple beside her, and she did not look away. The bravest people at Golgotha that day were the ones who stayed. There is a word in Hebrew, zurah, that means both narrow place and trouble. The ancient rabbis said that Egypt was a zara, a narrow place, a constriction that God's people passed through on the way to something they could not yet imagine. Perhaps the cross is the narrowest place in all of human history, the place where everything compressed down to a single man, on a single hill, on a single afternoon, and the whole weight of what it means to be human pressed down on him until there was nowhere else to go. What happened at Golgotha cannot be reduced to a transaction or a diagram. It is a mystery of love at a scale that resists explanation. It asks to be entered, not merely understood. It asks something of the person who hears it, not certainty, but attention, not easy answers, but the courage to stand near the darkness and not look away. The people who loved him thought it was over. It looked, by every reasonable measure, like the end of the story. But here is what the darkness did not know, what the stone rolled across the tomb did not know, what every power that had conspired to make this happen did not know. Love at this depth does not stay buried.